Namaste and good morning to all of you. Today is Saturday, and these days in this class, we are trying to go over Bhagavad Gita, one chapter in each lecture. So today we are going to look at the chapter number 3, and the title of this chapter is Karam Yoga. But before we do these studies, we always say a couple of mantras also. So let's say it together. Om Bhur Bhavaswaha Tatsavitra Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. So this is a Gayatri mantra where we are praying to God for improvement of our intellect so that we can absorb what we are studying from the scriptures. And now the second mantra which we do before this class, where we are recognizing that Lord Krishna has given us this nectar, which is called Dugdha also. Dugdha is a nectar. It's a nectar in the form of Bhagavad Gita to us. Sarvopanishdo gavo dogda gopal nandana partho vatsa sudhir bhogata dugdam gita amritam mahat. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So from all these studies, whether we study Bhagavad Gita or whether we study this other scripture, or whether we go to a church or to ashram, ultimately we are looking for peace. That's why we say Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace at the level of body, that means a healthy body. Peace at the level of mind, that means a calm mind. The mind which does not get agitated and angry very easy. Calm mind, peace. Then peace at the level of intellect. That means all the studies, it goes into our intellect easily. It sharpens our intellect, and at the end it becomes very subtle also. There's a difference between sharp and the subtle intellect. Subtle intellect makes us see God everywhere. Sharp intellect makes us pierce through this prakriti. How far the sun is, how far the moon is. How did the yogis knew? With a sharp intellect. How did they know the God is everywhere? With a subtle intellect. So when we say that Om Shanti, that's what we are saying. God, please give us that kind of intellect. So chapter 3, Karam Yoga. So far, Lord Krishna has been arguing against Arjuna's decision not to fight. Because we saw that in the first chapter, in the Vishad Yoga chapter, Arjuna said, I'm not going to fight. He sat down, put his bow and arrow on the seat, and he sat down. That means he gave up. He wanted to run to the jungle to live there for it as a life of a monk. He thought that is a better life. So Lord Krishna gave him a lot of arguments in the second chapter, which we looked at last week, Sankhya Yoga. At one moment, in verse number 47, which I told you, it is like a crux of the whole Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse number 47. Lord Krishna is advising Arjuna to do his duty without getting himself preoccupied with its result. Karmanya eva adhikaraste, ma phaleshu kadachana. Then in the second line, he said, do not get attached towards the inaction. That means don't sit back and don't do anything. And later on in the same chapter, he concluded that path of knowledge is very important too. So it's almost Lord Krishna is advocating the path of knowledge also. So like any other sincere student, Arjuna felt confused as to which path to walk on. How can I develop myself? Path of action or path of knowledge? The Sanatan Dharma, the Vedic philosophy, is taught to the student with a very intimate and a very free discussion between a teacher and the taught. In no other religion in the world we find such a freedom allowed to the disciple, where disciple can ask freely, openly, and even contradict the teacher. There can be a debate with the teacher and the taught. Because the great rishis of that land never bypass the intellect of their disciples by appealing to their blind faith or even insisting upon their abject devotion. The masters of that land, they encourage discussions. This is an Upanishadic style. And this has been preserved in Bhagavad Gita and even in other scriptures also. So if you have last week, because I've been telling you the rest of the week, we should look at that chapter. And if you have done it, you might have this question too. The doubt which Arjuna is expressing in the opening of this particular chapter, the chapter 3, the Karam Yoga chapter. The doubt is that what exactly is that path which we need to take as a seeker to realize ourselves? Is it knowledge or is it action? Is it both together we need to practice in a synthesis, or is it through a total renunciation of both? These questions should be our questions. As I said earlier, only to a seeker who has the enthusiasm to live the life indicated earlier will have these questions. Action and renunciation, they are advised in the Vedas for a seeker to pursue serially. Because no living creature with a mind and intellect can remain even for a moment of his wakeful, conscious existence without doing some kind of a work. Because cessation of all activities means death. So act we must from birth to death. We are all familiar with this. But instinctively, in our inborn ignorance, how do we act? We act motivated by our ego or egocentric desires. And that is called an uncultivated person. According to Upanishads, according to spirituality, according to Bhagavad Gita. Because when we entertain our sensual desires, we act in this world seeking joy and earning for ourselves the fleeting happiness and less sorrows. And we create a lot more mental impressions, which are called vasanas in Sanskrit, mental impressions. We came here to wash away the mental impressions, but we act like that. We keep on adding more and more impressions on our mind. That's why in this chapter, Lord Krishna is advising us, do the God-dedicated selfless actions. Perform them in a spirit of devotion and self-surrender. That's the only way you can exhaust your impressions or the vasanas or existing vasanas, and that's how you do not create new vasanas. Or you can call them fresh, tragic impressions. Because those kind of impression will create more and more actions in our life. Before Bhagavad Gita, before this time, That was like a Vedic period. The Karam was called for the ritualistic activities. Karam. In English, sometimes we say karma, but actually the word is karma. And Vedic seers, they called it a karma kand. So this Karam Yoga word came first time from the mouth of Lord Krishna. Karam Yoga. That's why a lot of people, they just say that, yeah, Bhagavad Gita is a book of Karam Yoga. Because it teaches us how to do the actions so that you can wash away your impressions. So in the Vedic time, the Karma Kand, or the actions, or the activities like that, they were pursued for a sufficiently long period of time. Long upasanas, very long havans, staying at the feet of your Guru, reciting the mantras day and night. What happened with that? Your heart got purified. That means your personality became integrated. There was a one-pointedness which was established in a person's mind with the Karam Kand like that. But the Gita was written at a different time. That old traditional thought became stereotyped and almost lifeless. That kind of a life could not nourish the culture anymore. So through Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gave us a reinterpretation of the Vedic truth in the context of his time and the language of his time too. Because the Vedas, sure, they are written in Sanskrit, but that Sanskrit was very old. People did not understand. So Gita was written in the today's Sanskrit, modern Sanskrit, which Arjuna could speak, Arjuna could understand, and other people also. Even today we understand this Sanskrit. It's a modern Sanskrit. And Arjuna was a warrior in the battlefield. He was fighting for the dharma, righteousness. So Lord Krishna had to tell him what to do in this particular time. Because it was not possible for Arjuna to indulge in ritualism, to make his mind one-pointed, unless he deserts his post of duty. If the ritualism alone was the path for all people, all time, then Arjuna could not do what he was supposed to do. So that's why in Bhagavad Gita, we have an expansion of the idea indicated in the Vedas. So same idea, but a different way. So Lord Krishna, in his divine declaration, gives the sanction in Bhagavad Gita. There are very clear verses in Bhagavad Gita. Lord Krishna says, any action can be glorious as sacrifice. Sacrifice means a yajna. Any action can be a yajna, if only it is undertaken with the required purity of motive. So that means the motive has to be right, with a spirit of surrender and with the deep emotion of love. That's why I always tell you those three things. Remember, when you do any action, make sure there's a selflessness into it. Make sure there's a skillfulness into it, and make sure there's a love for it also in it. Whether you're cleaning or cooking, learning, teaching, going for a walk, handling a big organization. No matter what you do, if you have these three criteria in there, it can become a Karam Yoga. All through the second chapter, Arjun's intellect was trying to follow closely the arguments of Lord Krishna, mainly to find fault with them. I'm talking about the second chapter, not in the third chapter. Scene little bit changes over here. He wanted to find fault because he was seeking for some support for his own decision to run away from that war zone. Because he was confused. He didn't want to face all those great warriors. And when Lord Krishna was telling him to act, and the knowledge is better, so to Arjuna, Lord Krishna's discourse was not clear. At one place, Lord was indicating that Karam was inferior to Buddhi. Because when he mentioned the Buddhi Yoga word, and in the same discourse, in the conclusion, he was supporting the path of renunciation also. So, of course, Arjuna was confused. Because Arjuna was seeking a confirmation that for his running away was a noble emotion to be applauded and appreciated and commended, supported by his friend, by his cousin, whom he loved so much. But unfortunately, he could not discover in Lord's words any direct support for his viewpoint. Because Arjuna almost wanted to say, whatever you are saying, this is exactly what I want. The Buddhi Yoga. So that's why this third chapter, the Karam Yoga, starts with Arjun's statement over here and almost like a question. Throughout Bhagavad Gita, if you look at it, Arjuna has asked 16 sets of questions. In chapter 2, there was a question, first question, that what is the disposition of one who is situated in divine consciousness? That was in verse number 54 of chapter 2. And in the chapter 3, there are two questions. The first one is the verse number 1, and the second one is verse number 36. And you can just note it down and look at those questions. Because it's good to know the questions from a person like him. And then only then we can understand the answers also. So the question is, if it be thought by you that knowledge is superior to action, why then do you engage me in this terrible action? So he is saying that you think that path of renunciation is better. Why don't you let me do that? And then he says, tell me one way by which I can for certain attain the highest. So in other words, he understands what the highest is, but he wants to know how to attain that highest. He is showing his confusion to the right person. It's good to show our confusion to our Guru so that we can get the right answer, right guidance. So whether the path of action or the way of knowledge was the direct approach to the eternal, the highest, the infinite. Lord Krishna gives the reply in conformity of that question. He says, in this world, there are two paths, the path of knowledge and the path of action. He says, path of the knowledge, the Sankhya's, and the path of action of the yogis. Yogi means Karam Yogi. So to consider the path of action and the path of knowledge as competitive is to understand neither of them. They being complementary are to be practiced serially. That's what Lord Krishna is saying very clearly in the beginning of this chapter. That means selfless activity will give us a chance to exhaust many of our vasanas, the impressions. So selfless action. Religious men, they fall into two categories: active and contemplative. So that means some people like to go out and do the seva. And some people can sit and meditate, active and contemplative. That is the temperament of the predominantly one or the other temperament. And these two classes fall so widely apart. But he says, see, Lord Krishna is the one who's talking still. Not by non-performance of action does a person reach actionlessness. So that means actionlessness does not mean that you don't do anything. Nor by mere renunciation he attains perfection. That's not how we attain perfection. Because Arjuna wanted to attain perfection. So by running away what you are supposed to do, you cannot attain perfection, he says. He says through right action, we have to get and complete. We got to purge our vasanas with the right action. It's almost like if there is some kind of a flaw in our, suppose it's a silver jug, it has been tarnished. How do we clean it? We got to rub it with a proper cream, proper powder, and then wash it off. This is what we need to do with the proper action. We do that. And then he also says nobody can remain even for a moment without doing any action. We are breathing, that's an action. We are sitting, that's an action. We are constantly doing actions. He says if we can restrain our organs and we think we are not doing the action, that is a hypocrite. To sit back physically, retire to not the way to reach anywhere. Especially, you cannot reach the final state of perfection. But on the other hand, if you can control your senses by the mind, engaging your organs of action in Karam Yoga without attachment, you will excel. So he is giving Arjuna and through Arjuna to us also a technique. Because in this particular verse, this is verse number 7 of chapter number 3, we have the entire science of right action and the complete technique of right living also. It's almost like a prescription he is giving it to us. Because when the mind is given a brighter and diviner field to roam about, our actions become better. So that's why Lord Krishna is saying, he's advising again and again to us, do not get attached to the fruits of your action. Because if we get attached to the fruits, we are attaching ourselves to the lower. Instead of gathering impressions, we may make use of our activities for the exhaustion of the existing impressions. That's what we need to do. Then he says, you got to do your bounden duties. As a human being, we have certain duties. We must do those. Why? Because action is superior to inaction. Even the maintenance of the body would not be possible for us if we stay inactive. According to the traditional Vedic meaning of bounden duty, there are 4 groups of it. The first one is Nitya Karam, daily duty. There's certain daily routine we follow. Daily duty, Nitya Karam. Then there are some duties we undertake on special occasions. Like Thanksgiving is coming, special occasion. Weekly prayers, our birthdays. So there are duties we are supposed to do. Then the third category is special rituals we perform. They are very necessary, where we invoke the gods to fulfill our desires. Those are called Kam Karam, desire prompted rituals. Then fourth category, which we should stay away from, Nishid Karam, forbidden actions. So Nitya Karam, Namaiti Karam, Kame Karam, and Nishid Karam. Yogis normally, they definitely stay away from Nishid Karam and reduce their Kame Karam also, the desire prompted activities. But the first two, they definitely do. So that's why Lord Krishna says, perform your bounden duty. Inactivity brings about the destruction of the nation also, society also, home also, and the individual himself or herself also. Then he gives the argument over here in this chapter, the world is bound by actions. But make sure that you perform the action for the sake of sacrifice. What does it really mean, sacrifice? The definition of sacrifice is any self-sacrificing work, self-sacrificing, undertaken in a spirit of self-dedication for the blessing of all, is a sacrifice. So that means when you do something for the benefit of others, that is a sacrifice, because you are sacrificing your selfishness. Even when we do the havan, we call sacrifice. So yajna, the Sanskrit word is yajna, very hard to translate into English. Yajna. Yajna rupi action really means you are doing it for the betterment of others. You are using your time, you are using your energy, you are using your material for the benefit of others. That's a yajna. And any action can be a yajna. We'll see that in the next chapter. Then Lord Krishna says, even the creator, the Prajapati, he created all this yajna rupi. He sacrificed. Then he says, all this nature, whether we look at the sun or the moon, we look at the sea when it's throbbing, or when we look at the earth, when it bears our burden, even the nature is doing it with the spirit of sacrifice. Why shouldn't we do it? Then he talks about all the divine forces, whether it's the earth or the water or the fire or the air or the space, all these higher gods, they give, they live in a spirit of yajna. As a householder, most of us are householders over here. We need to perform these yajnas also on a daily basis. Vedas tell us that there are 5 yajnas we are supposed to perform on a daily basis. Dev yajna. Dev yajna means do not pollute these 5 elemental forces. Brahm yajna, learning and spreading the ideas of our rishis. Pitri yajna, taking care of your parents, remembering your ancestors. Nar yajna, anybody who comes to your house, see God in them. Then bhut yajna, feeding the animals, taking care of the plants. These are like a panch mahayajna mentioned in our scriptures. It is the action that sets the wheel of universe moving. How? He talks about the food, comes forth beings. From the rain, food is produced. From sacrifices arises rain. and sacrifice is born of action. So he goes over in this chapter about this cycle, how we are all connected, how there's a unity. We got to learn how to live in unison with this wheel of action. We need to contribute to the harmony of life. And he talks about what happens who does not do it. He says he lives in vain. Anybody who's living just rejoicing his own senses is living in vain. The person who rejoices only in the self. Self over here means the Atma. Who is satisfied with the self? The Atma. Who is content in the self alone? For him, there is nothing more to do. And that is a contemplative person. So he's saying if you're living like that, sure, all you do is just contemplate like Lord Shiva does. But you are not like that. Not yet, at least. Got to be a subjective experience of a spiritual stature in us. Then we can say that we are on the path of knowledge. Then he gives the example of other kings, because Arjuna didn't want to wage this war. He said, in the olden times, Arjuna was familiar with those epics also. He said, King Janak, he uses the word Janak over here. He said he attained perfection through Karam Yoga. You are also a Kshatriya, so you do not shirk away from your duty. Born as a prince, you have a greater responsibility towards the community. You need to secure the welfare of these people of yours. Then he gives the example again. He says, whatever the great person does, the ordinary people will follow. And you are a leader. You are supposed to do your actions the right way. Then he gives his own example also. Because Lord Krishna is also a king. He says, observe me. Why don't you follow my example also? There's nothing in the three world I need to do. There's nothing unattained for me. Yet I engage myself in action. If you know the life story of Lord Krishna, entire life, it was a constant unveiling of his spirit of detachment. His birth mother, Devaki, right after he was born, he was taken away from the birth mother. He was raised by Yashoda, adopted mother, and his godfather. You know that story. Then he was a little boy. They moved from Gokul to Vrindavan. When he was only 10 years old, he was called to Mathura, where he had to fight and kill his tyrant uncle Kansa. He gave that kingdom to his grandfather Ugrasen. From Mathura, he came to Dwarka, a barren land. He created his kingdom over there. But even at that time, he was constantly helping others, waging the wars with the tyrants. And even at the time of this Mahabharata war, he took the role of a charioteer for Arjuna and gave away his army to Duryodhana because they both were his cousins. They both came there to help, asking for help. Duryodhana wanted the army. He got the army. Arjuna wanted a charioteer. He got the charioteer as a Lord Krishna. Complete detachment and constant activity. Never sat inactive all his life. He says the masses always imitate their leaders and heroes in their dress also, in their behavior also, in their moral values also, and actions also. As the ignorant men act from attachment to action, so should the wise people should act without attachment, wishing the welfare of the world. He uses the term lok sangraha here. Desire should be to guide the people. Am I being a good role model in my action? Because we are all leaders. In our own homes, we are leaders also to our children and grandchildren. Are we keeping them together? Are we good role models or not? If we are following the path of yoga, Karam yoga. He says the ignorant person acts motivated by his roots. But the wise person, the motivation is lok sangraha. I want to be the right example because others are following me. There is so much knowledge in this chapter, so much to learn from this chapter. I would like to stop it here and pick up from here next week. So I thought I'll be able to finish all this, but I don't want to go through it too fast that you are left with a lot of questions in your mind. So let's stop it here and we'll pick it up from here. Okay. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Visheshyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much. So now we can go through some dialogue also. If something you don't understand,